Hey guys, it's Tiffany. I'm really excited about this video. Sorry, I keep looking that way, thinking that the camera's on that side, it's on this side. What I'm gonna do today, what I'm gonna show you, you'll have to forgive me. I'm so congested. But what I'm showing you today is how I did my shipwreck tiles. So they are coasters. They're 4 1/4 inch, I think, by 4 1/4 inch squares. It's just bathroom tiles that I got at Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that. There's something like 23 cents a tile or something. So I have this one that is, I run a tight shipwreck, which feels accurate for my life. The ocean made me salty. Seize the day. And beach, please. I posted these in a couple of different Facebook groups, and the two biggest questions I got were what inks I used and what techniques, and what kind of tiles I used. So the tiles I used are from, like I said, Hobby Lobby, Home Depot.
Okay, let's be honest. I didn't get these tiles at Hobby Lobby. I meant to say Lowe's, not Hobby Lobby.
Any home renovation repair type situation would have that. These they had bundled up already in groups of 5. So they're, I think, 4 1/4 by 4 1/4, I think. Just bathroom tiles. And then the inks that I used for the wood grain, and you cannot even read this because it's spilled, but these are my go-to for wood grain. So this is caramel and teak wood. So teak wood is what I used for the darker outlines. And then caramel is what I used for the inner part of it. And then for the water, this is Pinata alcohol ink in white. And then I used Mermaid in the Ranger Tim Holtz, Cloudy Blue, and Sailboat Blue. You could really do any combination of colors. This is just the ones that I decided I want to try this time, and I'm really sorry that my face keeps going out of focus. I'm so pale. Yeah, so it was really fun. I really hope you enjoy this tutorial. If you have any questions, go ahead, you can comment below. And so let's get started. Okay, so today I'm going to try doing the shipwreck or shiplap, whatever you want to call it. So our first step is to tape off, so I taped off the back of the tiles, which if you see my other videos, I go through how to do it. Just make sure you've got a good seal on the edge here. I just kind of push it with my fingers. And then I've got 3 more of these that I'm going to go through and do it. And so rather than cut these shapes right here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put 4 pieces of masking tape across it, and then I'm going to use my X-Acto knife to cut. So I've just got regular masking tape. I'm just going to place it on there. 2, 3, 4. Okay. So, got that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a popsicle stick, and I'm going to, well, let's do the edges first. I'm going to cut the edges. There we go. Because I'm right-handed, so I'm just going to do the same thing on this side. And then in the middle, I'm going to start a little bit to the right and do this line first. And so I'm just going to cut there and there. And then I'm going to move a little bit over here and cut the second one. And I should be able to go in and take it out. And I'm cool with it not being exactly centered. So there's that one.
I highly recommend, even on your tumblers, not trying to freehand cut pieces of masking tape into straight lines. If you're anything like me, I am horrible at that. So this method of putting the whole thing on and using the popsicle stick to cut out the separation and then using your tweezers to get rid of it was so much faster and so much better. Like, it looked like actual shiplap or actual wood rather than some sort of weird hodgepodge of a hot mess. Which, let's be honest, my very first textile was.
So the teak wood is going to go on the outside, so let's... I'm going to use this. Am I? I think I'm going to use this brush. And, I'm going to use this brush for the teak wood. Am I? Jesus. There we go. Make sure you get the sides. I'm just going to go ahead and do the sides by themselves. Okay, now I'm going to okay, that one is done. The next one.
Alright, let me apologize for the truly horrific camera angle in this point of the video. I did not realize that when I was doing the edges that I was out of frame for that shot. I also didn't realize until much later that my tripod was so far into the shot, and I adjusted it in later portions of the video as I was recording. But what I was basically doing here is I've got my alcohol inks in a medicine cup rather than putting them directly on the brush from the bottle. I put a little bit in a medicine cup so I can kind of control a little bit better where it goes and how much saturation is getting on the brush. So I'm just taking it, I kind of brush the sides, and then I'll go back in with the foam brush to give it some texture. Just kind of dab it on there like you see me doing in these the lines between the masking tape to give it a little bit of texture, so it's not just like one big streak. It's a fairly quick process. It dries almost immediately on these tiles. Alcohol ink is very forgiving, which is something that I like about it, because if you do something, and it doesn't really work the way that you want it to do, it's not that big of a deal. You can just kind of get some 91% alcohol, especially if you don't base paint the tiles. I don't base paint these, so if I want to erase it all before I seal it and epoxy it, I just got to get some 91% alcohol and it'll basically come off and I can start all over again. So that's something I really enjoy about doing the alcohol inks. But yeah, as you can see, it's pretty easy. Didn't really take me very long. I just kind of sped it up because, nobody wants to watch somebody do 4 of these in real time if there's no interaction.
You can see that I've got a couple of different brushes there that I had available to use. I just decided to use the foam brush for the edges because it's easier to do the edges with the foam brush. The chip brush takes a little bit more work to make sure you've got the edges fully covered because the bristles aren't quite as compact as the foam.
I'm going to go through and just take off the tape. And it's going to have bled through a little bit, that's okay. That's just how it works. Plus it'll give it a more natural look to the wood anyways. And we add the caramel in there. Yes, so I'm happy with that.
So I'm using tweezers to remove this masking tape. You can use whatever you want, if you have a weeding tool, or you can use your fingernails just to kind of pick up the edges. I just had those tweezers right there next to me. It's fairly easy. The bleeding is going to happen if you use masking tape and alcohol inks, especially with how hard I was dabbing the inks on there. If you use something like electrical tape, it won't bleed quite as bad. You'll get crisper lines. But for this kind of thing, I really prefer the irregular lines because it makes it look more natural and less like a picture, if you will.
Okay, so I changed the angle because I realized you could see the legs of the tripod. Alright, so I've got my 4, sorry, my dog is driving me crazy. I've got my 4 tiles. I did this one too, just as this was my first one that I did. You can see it's not really even. Okay, so I'm going to take the caramel alcohol ink and, oh my gosh. You can tell I didn't store these correctly because I've got to really mean it. There we go. Okay. Oh, that's way too much, but so I've got that, and then what I've got is this brush right here, and I'm going to go through and make it look rougher. To give it that wood grain texture. I did not move fast enough on that one.
So this part is fairly tedious going through. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. These 4 tiles to complete this part took me about 25 minutes. Talking through it and not really focusing too hard on it. The great thing about alcohol inks is that they are very easily repositionable. So you'll see what I do at the beginning is use that foam brush and put it there and then go back in with that smaller paintbrush and give it the texture. And I just decided that that was not worth it, and started to, I just put the ink in that medicine cup right there and just dipped that paintbrush straight in there. It was way easier. I could start with the edges and make sure that it wasn't bleeding too much. That's a big, you want to make sure that your colors don't bleed together, especially if you haven't sealed the first one. Using that smaller brush gave me a little bit more control over the edges to make sure that my darker lines between my planks didn't get blurred too much, because it could easily have become a very muddled mess. You can use any paintbrush or any brush really for this. I just didn't want to, again, blur the lines that I had made with the darker ink, because if I went in with a bigger chip brush and tried to make bigger texture like that, my fear was that I would move that wet ink onto the already dried darker ink and it would just kind of blur those lines and you wouldn't really be able to get the definition that you wanted on that with the darker lines between the planks. And as you can see, my dog decided that she wanted to sit in my lap and would not leave me alone, so I just kind of let her sit there while I was doing it until she wanted to lick the inks, and then she had to go sit on her little bed over there. Stuff like this I find really fun, and it's not something that's unforgiving. You know, epoxy can sometimes be very unforgiving, and you have to strip cups and you have to redo things and start over from the beginning. But you know, with inks, you can kind of just get it a little bit more wet and move it around and do it all over again, without having really any loss of product other than just a little bit of that ink. So.
Got this little baby brush, and I'm going to take the teak wood just going to clean this a little bit. Going back to the teak wood. And I'm just going to, I've ruined it. Oh no, I didn't. Okay. Add. There we go. So it's just got the little, like where the little rivets should be. Like that.
Just some tips and tricks here for adding your rivets. Be careful, you'll see me go in and with the lighter color and kind of redo a couple of the planks, because I either made them too large and it kind of took over the whole thing, or not large enough and I had to go in again. If you want it to look like kind of like a wood grain, like a knot, you can, you know, do a bigger dot of the ink and wait for it to dry and then do a smaller, and it gives you kind of that knotted look. But I went through a little bit on some of these lines that were not as dark as I wanted them to be and kind of painted them in there too. And I have kind of a shaky hand, so don't judge. But yeah, the rivets are pretty easy to do. You don't have to do them. I think it just adds a nice little added bonus there that gives it a little bit of reality.
So I've got them all done. My last step on this part is to spray it with Kamar varnish. It does not react with the inks, so it won't cause it to like blur or ruin your lines or anything like that. It's not going to turn it green. It's the best that I've found. So that's my next step.
Just a side note, this was the first time I'd ever done this and I was recording the video. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, so here is me trying to decide if I want to epoxy it first.
Using faux Rizzle. Got 30 milliliters A and B. I'm not going to need that much for this, but I have other cups that I have to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix it all together. I have my respirator on because it's really windy today and cold, so I don't have my window open. So I don't have a lot of ventilation. Once I leave, I'll open the window, but B. Especially when you're heating epoxy up, that's when it becomes the most toxic. So it's really important to have gloves and to wear a respirator. And my dog is not in here. She is in another part of the house. I don't baby my epoxy because we're going to be using heat on it anyways, which will get out all the air bubbles. Make sure I scrape the sides, make sure I get the bottom really well, and just kind of mix the crap out of it. And I'm mixing it until it runs clear when I do that. When I do this and it runs clear, that's how I know it's ready. Alright. Now you can see these are kind of shiny because they've sprayed them with the Kamar varnish. I did 2 coats. No, that's not it. I did 2 coats of the Kamar varnish so that it won't turn colors and my ink won't bleed. Alright. to make sure there's a good layer of epoxy and it's even. I'm going to take my heat gun. I think there is a hair in there. All right.
Once again, just a reminder that this is my very first time doing this, and I had decided that I wasn't going to do a layer of epoxy and let it cure and then do the inks afterwards. I was just going to do it directly into the first layer of epoxy. That was a terrible idea because as I was using my heat gun to move around the epoxy and make the waves look, you know, more swirled together or whatever, it actually was making it separate from the ink, and it was leaving like little bald spots where the ink would just dry to the tile below it, and it looked horrible. So this that you're watching was my trial. I'm gonna call it my trial tile, where I actually really liked how the waves came out for the most part, but there was like a couple of bald spots that I was just not feeling. So I, on the other 4, did a totally different process and did a layer of epoxy and let that cure before I went back in with another thin layer of epoxy, and then did the alcohol ink. So that's what you'll see here in just a second. Okay, so this is the next day, and I've got my tiles all sealed with just the epoxy, ready to do the alcohol inks. And I'm doing a voiceover on this part because I did not realize how loud the squealing of my turners were in the background. I've got probably 4 cups that are turning, and the squeal on the video is ungodly. So I'm just going to walk you through what I'm doing. So I've got my epoxy mixed up. I'm still using faux Rizzle. For my tiles, I either use faux Rizzle or KS resin, depending on what I have on hand. The faux Rizzle I like because it dries faster, and it still has the heat tolerance of, I think it's 450 or something like that. So I'm just putting a relatively thin layer on there to make sure that it's got good coverage, and that when I put the inks on there, they'll be able to move around pretty freely. I just didn't want any bald patches or anything like that on the sides. So I heated up my heat gun. That makes it a little bit easier to move, get any bubbles out, because you don't want any bubbles in your resin. That's actually an embossing heat gun I've had forever when I used to do Stampin' Up. My mother was like a Stampin' Up person, so I've had it, you know, since John wrote his gospel. Alright, so I'm just going to I put a little bit more. I think I did a little too thin on that tile. I went into a little too little, because you want to be able to move it around, and not have such a thin layer that what happens on the other one happens again, right? Where the ink kind of dries underneath the layer of epoxy, and then you don't have enough to move around, and it kind of looks weird. Alright, so I started out with the blue. You can start out with any color. I've, through process of elimination, decided that I like it better when I start with one of the colors rather than the white on the bottom. It doesn't really matter. And make sure huge pro tip, make sure that your table is even. On one of the test tile that I did, my table was not even, and when it dried like halfway up the tile, and it looks horrible. So let's just not tell anybody about that, and we'll pretend like everything was normal and everything came out perfectly the first time. So I'm just adding layers of the ink. The white is what really makes those colors pop against the wood background. It gives the opaqueness to the ink. Otherwise, they're pretty translucent, and you would be able to see the wood through it, and it really wouldn't look like water. So the white Pinata alcohol ink is the one that really gives it the texture and the vibrancy. So don't use a light hand with your white ink. I used, I think, a light blue, a darker blue, and then a mermaid turquoise kind of thing. But you can use any colors that you want to make your ocean. And I just take my heat gun and I'm kind of just moving it around. You can push it up and down. That kind of gives it a little bit of lacing. Like, kind of looks like the foaming of the waves. And make sure you do it in more than one direction. That way it looks a little bit more natural. I did some in like a circular motion, and I did back and forth and then up and down just to kind of make it look like it was really moving in a fluid motion. And you can mess with it for however long you want. You're not going to ruin it by, moving it around too much. The alcohol inks are really forgiving. Again, I keep saying that, but they really are. I really enjoy working with them because they're way more forgiving than some of the other mediums that you can use. I would not recommend using a torch on this portion of your work because alcohol is flammable. Alcohol inks are flammable, and it will catch on fire. So abort mission on the torch for this part, for popping bubbles or anything like that. Use a heat gun or mist it finely with 91% alcohol, and it'll pop those bubbles. As you can see, I got blue ink all over my tile because I was an idiot and touched the blue ink part with my glove and then had to wipe it off with a baby wipe. But, we'll just not tell anybody about that. I think I turned it upside down, so you couldn't really see the worst of it, where the blue kind of stuck to the epoxy. It stained it a little bit. So yeah, here we go on the next 3 tiles. So go back and forth on what the easiest way is to spread the epoxy on tiles. And you'll see I use a popsicle stick sometimes. I use my hands sometimes. It just depends on, I think, my mood at the time. The popsicle stick is good for making sure you clean off. You don't have too much epoxy, because when you have too much on the tile, it'll bleed over the side, drip over the sides, and you'll have a whole lot stuck to your masking tape on the back of the tile to peel off. But if you use a popsicle stick and you kind of scrape off any excess that you have, you won't have as bad drips on when it comes time to take the masking tape off the back of your tile. It's really satisfying to watch this so fast, so enjoy.
Alright, so I've got my 4 tiles that are all cured and ready for decals. I'm really happy with how they came out. They look really cute. And so I decided I'm going to make them into coasters with an ocean theme. So I've got my 4 quotes. This one says, "The ocean made me salty." This one says, "I run a tight shipwreck." This one says, "Beach please," or "Beach please." And this one says, "Seize the day." You can't see them because they're white. But seize like S-E-A-S, not seize. So I'm going to go ahead and put these on here. And then my last step is to, got some random letters attached here, will be to put on the final layer of epoxy. So we've got "Seize the Day." Which I I didn't buy these anywhere. I just kind of looked up some sayings, some punny sayings that I wanted, and then I made them myself. So I got seize the day. It's probably backwards. Let's see what's next.
Just a recommendation for me, if you're going to make your own cut files using fonts that you've gotten off the internet, make sure you have, and you're going to sell the items that you're making. If you're just making them for personal use, it's not a big deal. But if you're going to intend to sell any of the things that you're making, make sure you have a commercial license for that font. Because if you download it from a free site that doesn't give you a commercial use license, then the creator of the font can come after you for copyright. Because it was supposed to be for personal use only. I use creativefabrica.com and creativemarket.com the most. Creative Market gives you, I think it's like 6 free files every week, and usually 1 or 2 of them are fonts. And I've gotten some really great fonts from there. Creative Fabrica does daily deals where they have fonts and stuff that are $1, or you can do a bundle of, I think it's 30 fonts or 30 items for $17. So you pay $1, or sometimes they have them for free, and you get lifetime commercial license with all of their fonts that you purchase from them. So just a little tip from me. I always pay for my fonts just because I don't want to have to keep track of what fonts I have a commercial license for and what I did for free and for personal use only. I don't have time to keep track of that kind of thing, so I just pay for licenses for all of them. That way I don't have to worry about it. I was really happy with how these came out. They looked exactly like I wanted them to. And I continue to show them upside down. And here I am turning them upside down so that you actually can't read them. Don't judge. I was starting to get a cold, so.
Okay. So here we go. We got our 4 pieces of felt and our 4 tiles. I just start with one end. Doesn't matter which side. Just do a line of hot glue. Try to not do it too close. Try to not do it too close to the edge, because what I do is I kind of push the felt towards the edge. And what you don't want a lot of that to come over. There we go. So it's nice, good seal, but there's not hot glue leaking out of that. Then I go down one side. Go. And last side. Just kind of push it. Oh, and you can see right there some of the hot glue. Okay, but that's fine. And so, oops. What I do after that is I take my scissors and I hold them at an angle. So if you're looking at this, my scissors are at like a 45-degree angle. And I just cut off any excess. So it looks clean on the back and clean when you look at it from the front. So just do a 45-degree angle. And try to do as smooth a cut as possible. And this one actually That's not too bad. A little bit right there. Not too bad. And let's see. And then this little corner right here has a little bit. And you can come from this side too, if you can't get the right angle on it, and kind of snip it. There we go. Now, it's got a nice back on it. All done. And just do the same thing for all four. That's not real. I just still gotta cut the rest of these. All right, and that is complete. Got all 4, have backs, and are ready to be used. Okay, so got my glue gun, gotta plug it in. Should have done that before I hit record, but I didn't, so here we are. This one I got at Home Depot, maybe. It's like an industrial strength. Takes the really thick glue sticks, like the really thick ones. Like this is a regular glue stick, and that's the one they're enormous, but I love it. So I decided to, this is for a different one. I'm gonna do this kind of tan flesh color for this. So what I do is kind of measure it out on the felt, and then I do a rough cut around it. And I'll just cut 4 of these out. And then just do it down the side here. Once I've got them glued on, I'll be able to, I'll go through and cut a little bit closer. And you know, if you're the person that wants it perfectly the same size as the tile, you can absolutely, you know, measure your tile and then measure your felt and, you know, use rotary cutter and cut it all out. I did that. I used to do that to begin with, and it became tedious to me to do it like that, so I don't do it like that anymore. And this piece of felt was, I don't know, I think it was like $1 at Michael's. It was, their felt was like 50% off or something like that. It was not very expensive at all. And I have done, I wonder if I have some right here. I don't. I have done cork before. I don't know that I have any right now. You can get like a 2-inch roll of cork that has sticky backing, and I have used that before, and it looks really nice. Just depending on what you're putting it on, if you have to do more than one row, and it just can be tedious. So it just depends on the kind of look you're going for. Like the not like sewing cork, but cork that you would like use for a bulletin board or something. And that is, it's almost ready. It's dripping, but it's like still hard while it's dripping. So, and here you can see why I use wax paper. This is what happens when you don't use the wax paper and keep it where it's supposed to be. So, good times, good times. All right, so I've got my completed. These are all nice and hardened. You have to ignore my dog whining in the background. She's a little bit, needs all the attention. So what we've got left is, so you can see these drips. I don't know if you can see them. And places where the epoxy has come over the sides of the tile. So what I'm going to do is I have an X-Acto knife. It's just the cheap like $3 X-Acto knife from Hobby Lobby that I use for this. I don't use my good Cricut one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the masking tape right there in the corner, and I'm just going to kind of peel it up like this. So you can see the tile, just kind of peel it up. And if you take, see that you can see this strip right here, how it's kind of holding on. If you take it and you pull, instead of peeling it off like you would a banana, pull it towards the inside rather than peeling it towards the outside, it'll just come off and you won't peel off any of the epoxy that's on your sides. So this one actually did pretty well. I don't know that I'm going to have a whole lot of problems with it. So I'll just go through all four sides. So this one has a little bit of like super thin epoxy from where when I had epoxy in my gloves and I was like handling it, it's like, you can see it's kind of really shiny. So that part will peel off. The part that's going to give you a struggle is when there's a drip like that. So again, I just kind of peel it towards, and if it comes off like that, see how you can see how the masking tape kind of peeled off. I take my X-Acto knife and going away from me, because tell me how I know that you should do that, and make it kind of stand up, and then peel it towards the inner, peel it the opposite way, because you don't want to peel it, because if I pulled that towards the outside, that's going to peel off right, just like a banana. It'll peel off and break your seal. So this one, here we go. As you can see, this one's actually relatively easy. I've had some that were significantly more difficult, so if it's harder for you, it's totally normal. All right, I'm just gonna kind of peel it up and push it in. And then right here, I've got a little bit of masking tape right there. This light over here is super obnoxious. So I'm just gonna kind of work my knife under it and peel it off. One done. Now I'm gonna just do the rest. I'll probably speed this up so you don't have to watch me do 4 in real time.
So if I'm being completely honest, this is actually the most satisfying part of this entire process, is peeling the masking tape off of the backs of the tiles. There's just something so satisfying when a whole piece comes off all by itself. So just a couple of tips when you're getting started. Start at the corners and take your X-Acto knife and kind of slide it under the masking tape, and you can actually run it along the edge as you peel off the tape, and it actually will come up a lot faster You'll see me start to do that probably here in a little bit, because peeling those little drips off one by one is actually really tough on your nails. I, for some reason, even though I'm holding an X-Acto knife in my hand, have a tendency to try to pick it off like that, instead of using my knife like I should. So just be aware of that. And the number of drips you get all depends on how much epoxy you've put over. So I didn't video me putting the last layer of epoxy I'm sorry, I'm still kind of sick and my brain is dead. Over the vinyl the decals that I put on, just because I felt like it was redundant. But the number of drips you get is very proportional to the amount of epoxy you put on your tile. So if you put a thinner layer, you're not going to get as much drips because there's not as much to overflow. Or if you babysit your epoxy and your tiles, you can go back with a popsicle stick, every 30 minutes after you put it on there and kind of clean it off to get smoother sides. I don't mind a textured side personally, and these ones are just for me, so I wasn't super worried about it. But especially for when I do like Milky Way tiles or anything like that where I'm doing any sort of veining or using my heat gun to make any patterns, it's kind of inevitable that the edges will be a little bit bumpy, and I actually like it that way. It kind of shows that it was hand done and it's not something that was, cranked out of a factory, and it makes it one of a kind and unique. There was a huge piece of epoxy right there at the bottom of that particular tile. So yeah, the masking tape works really, and I think I'm going to speed it up a little bit more just to kind of, because you get the idea of what I'm doing. Every tile is a little bit different, and every tile presents a little bit of a different challenge. These ones where we're putting so much ink at the bottom and using so much heat on them, you'll see there's a lot more blue epoxy at the bottom for me to peel off. But I did try to smooth that out so it was a little bit easier to do. And also, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for these to make sure that your surface that you're drying them on is level. I had a couple of them that I didn't think the table was level, and so I propped a popsicle stick under the cup that I was using to dry it, and I came back the next day and almost all of my ocean had run off the bottom, and it was basically just wood grain. So just keep an eye on it, on the epoxy, and see if it's moving. If it is, make some adjustments. Even the slightest bit of not being level can really affect it.
Okay, so got my glue gun, gotta plug it in. Should have done that before I hit record, but I didn't, so here we are. This one I got at Home Depot, maybe. It's like an industrial strength. Takes the really thick glue sticks, like the really thick ones. Like this is a regular glue stick, and that's the one they're enormous, but I love it. So I decided to, this is for a different one, I'm going to do this kind of tan flesh color for this. So what I do is kind of measure it out on the felt, and then I do a rough cut around it. And I'll just cut 4 of these out. And then just do it down the side here. Once I've got them glued on, I'll be able to, I'll go through and cut a little bit closer. And if you're the person that wants it perfectly the same size as the tile, you can absolutely, measure your tile and then measure your felt and, you know, use rotary cutter and cut it all out. I did that. I used to do that to begin with, and it became tedious to me to do it like that, so I don't do it like that anymore. And this piece of felt was, I don't know, I think it was like $1 at Michael's. It was, their felt was like 50% off or something like that. It was not very expensive at all. And I have done, I wonder if I have some right here. I don't. I have done cork before. I don't know that I have any right now. You can get like a 2-inch roll of cork that has sticky backing, and I have used that before, and it looks really nice. Just depending on what you're putting it on, if you have to do more than one row, and it just can be tedious. So it just depends on the kind of look you're going for. Like not like sewing cork, but cork that you would like use for a bulletin board or something. We got our 4 pieces of felt and our 4 tiles. I just start with one end. Doesn't matter which side. Just do a line of hot glue. Try to not do it too close. Try to not do it too close to the edge, because what I do is I kind of push the felt towards the edge. And what you don't want a lot of that to come over. There we go. So it's nice, good seal, but there's not hot glue leaking out of that. Then I go down one side. Go down this side. Go. And last side. Just kind of push it. Oh, and see you can see right there some of the hot glue. Okay, well, that's fine. And so, oops. What I do after that is I take my scissors and I hold them at an angle. So if you're looking at this, my scissors are at like a 45-degree angle. And I just cut off any excess. So it looks clean on the back and clean when you look at it from the front. So just do a 45-degree angle. And try to do as smooth a cut as possible. Go. And this one actually, this side's not too bad. A little bit right there, but not too bad. And then this little corner right here has a little bit. And you can come from this side too, if you can't get the right angle on it, and kind of snip it. There we go. Now, it's got a nice back on it. all done.
You probably noticed that some of the felt I had to kind of stretch because I was hopped up on cold medicine trying to record this video and didn't necessarily cut straight lines. So another good thing about felt, I love the forgiving elements, right? So felt's pretty forgiving. You can kind of stretch it and pull it and make it fit to a certain extent. I mean, let's not be extreme, but if you don't cut it perfectly straight, you can kind of pull it and nudge it through and you won't even be able to tell. So this part is pretty easy. If you're going to use white felt, I would caution you to not do that on something that you've used alcohol inks or paint where it's kind of coming through, unless you use like 2 millimeter thick white felt, because the 1 millimeter is going to, the colors are going to bleed through and you're going to be able to see it. So the darker colors you can't really, but if you're going to use white felt on the back of your stuff, make sure that you use the thicker so that you won't be able to see the bleed through of the colors.
All right, and that is complete. Got all 4, have backs, and are ready to be used. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial and I hope everything made sense. Been feeling kind of sick this week, so if anything didn't make sense, just shoot me an email, comment below, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Can't wait to see what you guys create. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I was, in real life, just kind of winging it. I'd seen a couple of tumblers on Facebook. And my go-to for when I see a new technique that I'm too chicken to try in a cup is to try to incorporate it into some kind of tile. And I just kind of got inspired to do some coasters. And I may end up giving these away. I have a friend whose mother-in-law has a beach house, so I may give them to her. But yeah, I hope you really enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. I've got a couple of really fun ones in the works, so I'll see you next time.